What's going on, guys? Welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the Polaris and the Perseus. Now, I did a video on these two ships about a year ago, but in that year, a lot has changed, right? A lot has changed, and mostly it deals with the Polaris, but a lot has also just recently changed in terms of like engineering not coming out with 4.0. So there's going to be a potential couple of patches where we could really see the Polaris be much more effective, because especially with the skeleton crew, and that is because of the no engineering. And now, one of the big things that I said in my video last year was that the Perseus wasn't going to have the same engineering requirements as the Polaris, which is true. Like, it's not going to have the same kind of requirements, but now that we don't have engineering in for a couple of patches, at least for a while, we don't know how long it's going to be. You know, we can speculate on that in the comments, but at least for the time being, the Polaris is going to be much more effective with the skeleton crew. You know what I mean? So, and what has changed with the Polaris? Now, again, these models here, guys, these are not updated models. These models are pretty old, but it is the basic design of what the ship is basically going to be. So the turrets on top, I do believe, are getting quad size 4s turrets, and then this ship will also have a PDS system. It'll have size 1 Badgers, I think 3 on the top and 4 on the bottom, for a total of 7. And then the big thing is the bottom turret, the chin turret here, is going to have dual size 6s that are going to be bespoke for the Polaris, which I do think is fantastic. Do I wish you could change them out for other ones? But you know, a million DPS, like, I'm not gonna complain about that amount of firepower output from a bespoke weapon ever. And you know, those dual size 6s doing a million DPS gets me excited for these dual size 7s, these two dual size 7s here over here on the Perseus. Like, what kind of damage are those going to do when those come out into the game? Like, that's going to be even more crazy. If these are doing a million, these are probably going to do 1.5 million, 2 million DPS. So like, it's going to be very interesting to see when that comes out. But I do think now, like, the Perseus truly feels like a real capital ship. I felt like it was very severely undergunned, and while its role is not to be like in a nose-to-nose fight with another capital ship, it can at least, if it needs to, hold its own against other ships, and its main competitor is the Idris. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I just want to point something else out, is this. When it comes to the Polaris, I know it has a capital class radar. It can see things from very long ranges away, but you also have to understand that this is a very big ship itself. And in the game currently, in most fighters, you can spot a reclaimer from over 30 kilometers away. You know, it's a big ship. It has a big radar, a big cross section. It can be seen. So a lot of people were saying in comments of my previous videos that I've been covering the Polaris over the past couple of weeks, they've been saying that the Polaris can shoot its torpedoes from 30 kilometers away, which is probably true. The problem with that is that these torpedoes, we don't know how fast they're going to be, but if we assume that they're anywhere around the range and the speed of the size 9 torpedoes, they're probably going to be a lot slower, which means from 30 kilometers, you're going to have a lot of time to react to that. And the only thing that I was trying to tell people is you want to give people the least amount of time to react to your torpedoes. So I do think that when the Idris comes out, when we get the K and the P, I don't think we're going to get the M, but I do think there is a possibility that we might get the Idris M. Maybe I'll talk about that in a video if you guys want my reasonings why we might get the Idris M. But I do think you're gonna want to try to surprise the Idris as much as you can. And how can you do that? Is you probably would need a fleet. So you need to theory craft a fleet of ships that you would want to send in and try to attack the Idris. Basically, you would want ships to be your distractions. But we'll get into that, like I said, here in just a minute. I do want to finish up on the Idris, its changes, and how I personally feel about it, because one of the things that I said last year was the crew requirement, and that the Perseus with a smaller crew was much more effective than a skeleton crewed Polaris. But to me, that's changed significantly, because with the dual size 6s, with the dual quad size 4 turrets, that's a mouthful to say. I do think that the ship is now much more effective, and it could be run with a skeleton crew now, and without engineering, that's going to make that dream even more possible. And the dream's going to be even more possible for people who want to solo their Polarises, whether you want to put your Vulture inside and go do salvaging, whether you want to use it as a big cargo ship, because it does have 576 SU of cargo space, which I think is isn't that more than just about every ship except for the whole sea. I think the whole sea is the only one that has right around that or more. I'm not really sure because I don't do a whole lot of cargo stuff, but either way, 576 SU of cargo space is nothing to sneeze at. And if you want to use it as a mobile salvage operation, I mean, you got plenty of space, you got plenty of firepower to protect you, and you know, it can fit a Vulture inside, so you can really use it as that. As a solo player, that's still going to be pretty hard, because we don't have the ability to, let's just say I'm in a different ship and I want to open my capital ship. There's no way for this for us to currently do that. So I still think it would be better to have a small skeleton crew of people doing this, but you can still run this as a mostly PvE ship if you so choose to, you know. But the fun thing about the Polaris is going to be shooting those torpedoes at bigger ships and making them blow up. So before we get into that theory crafting side of the video, I have to tell you guys, and I have to make a change to what I said last year. Last year, I said the Perseus was the better ship based on effectiveness and things like that. But now I have to change that and say that the Polaris is the more effective ship. Now, I still think the Perseus is probably the sexiest ship in the game. I'm just going to say it like that. You know what I'm saying? The Perseus to me is the best looking ship in the game. I just like the overall design of it. I'm not saying that the Polaris is ugly. This is not an indictment on the Polaris's looks. I do think the Polaris looks great. I just think this one looks better. But in terms of their effectiveness now, I think the Polaris is where it should have been a year ago. It is where it should be. It should have PDSs. It should have these upgunned weapons. It should be a menace if you come across it. And I do think one of the reasons why they upgunned these turrets and the 10 turret is because we have another ship that has size 10 weapons, and if you just kind of hang around the business end of where those missiles, those bombs come out, you can shoot those bombs and blow it up. Now you could do the same thing in the A2, but no one fears any of the turrets from the A2. They might fear some dual size 4s, and they might fear these size 5s, and they might want to try to stay away from it. Yeah, we just don't know how fast they're going to come out. You know, if they're going to be slow, you know, they can still potentially be shot down from a longer range away. But I think that you would still probably need to get somewhat close to try to shoot those torpedoes down. But I do like the idea of this thing has a small aerial denial and, you know, the front of the ship. And I do think that it does cover the top of the ship pretty well. But having this forward aerial denial space where your main weapon is coming out at is, I think, a very big and a very important change. Now, again, I'm changing my thing from last year to the Polaris. Okay, Polaris is going to be the better ship, at least for the time where we don't have engineering in the game. And I do think that this will be one of those special times where we look back at the game and we'll say that, man, do you guys remember the couple of patches where we can fly the Polaris without engineering? And we're going to really think about this as a special time. So while we have it, I do think it's important that we try to enjoy it as much as we can. But okay, so that out of the way, now let's get into the point to where we do a little bit of theory crafting, right? because I do think that if you want to attack an Idris, I do think it should be a difficult thing to do, right? And I know we don't have the Idris K on Starship 42, but we are going to use the Idris M as an example, not have too many. Delete one of these. All right, so we got our Idris M, right? And how should we go about attacking the Idris? I do think it's very simple. You make a torpedo fleet. Okay, so what does that mean? That means you're going to have an Eclipse. Oh. Going to have an Eclipse. You're going to have a Retaliator. You're going to have a Harbinger, or not a Harbinger, Hoplite. Is it a Harbinger or the Hoplite? Which one of these has the fucking torpedoes on it? I think it's the Harbinger. Gonna bring one of these. You're gonna bring a Gladiator. And you're also going to have the Perseus, which is already here on the screen, right? So this is going to be your torpedo fleet. And the thing about this too, guys, is like, I'm just using single ships as an example. And I'm only doing that because I don't want the screen to get like too messy or get into a way where, you know, it can't really be understood, right? And I do think it's important that you have these ships, and then you can have your own fleet of ships inside the Polaris as well. You can have like Furies, you can have like a couple of light fighters, but I do think in this situation that we're going to be using the Furies, because at least with a fleet of Furies, we can you know, it just makes more sense because you can put more of those in anything than you can light fighters, right? So this is going to be our torpedo fleet, right? Because all of these ships have torpedoes, right? And really what all of these ships are is a sacrifice, right? Their mission is to make sure that this ship can land its torpedoes onto this ship. Because like I said, trying to land the shots at 30 kilometers probably isn't going to work out all that well. Because if I was the captain of this ship, I would just tell them like, hey, our PDSs, we got bigger PDSs than they have. And we also, you know, we also have our own fighter squadron on board that we can deploy. And if this thing opens up and hundreds of Furies come out of this thing, because I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to put a lot of Furies in here. A lot. Hundreds of Furies come out of this thing, and they're absolutely going to wreck shop on everything out here. They're going to kill everything, right? These ships are going to have a hard time dealing with these Furies. That's why I do think that, and I'll give each side of their own Fury as visual representation. Let me go down here to, I went too far. So this one Fury is going to represent hundreds of Furies. And this one over here is going to represent hundreds of Furies. So you're going to want to launch your Furies, and you want to send your Furies out with your torpedo fleet to, and you want to have your Retaliator and your Eclipse try to start occupying the PDSs of this ship. And these ships also are going to occupy the PDSs with their size 5 turrets, and the Furies are going to start attacking the other Furies. And you know, the Perseus is going to start trying to deal DPS and try to soften this up a little bit, so that when the Polaris arrives, it can offload its size 10 torpedoes and hopefully get some shots landed. But I do think in a 1v1, I do think it'll be hard for the for the Polaris, even with its guns upsized, it's going to be very hard. Even with the Idris K that has the laser cannon in the front, I do think that laser cannon is going to be very, 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 very powerful. And the Idris, not the Idris, but the Polaris is not going to want to be on the business end of this, what was pretended as the K of this railgun. So not railgun, but the laser cannon. So with that being said, I do think this is one of the main ways that you can go about attacking an Idris. And essentially, the Polaris wouldn't even show up to the fight at first, right? You would send these guys in first, and then once they deploy their fighters, they open up their ship, they deploy their fighters out. Polaris jumps in, deploys its fighters, sends their fighters out to attack their Furies, and then it tries to drop its torpedoes and recover its own Furies and get the hell out of Dodge, because it's not meant to stand around and fight. But I do think, and like I said, in any case, guys, like every fight in this game with the current flight tuning, with the wiggles and everything that's going on with PvP at the moment, depends on fighter squadron versus fighter squadron. The better fighter squadron is usually going to decide that fight. So hopefully, you bring the best fighter squadron possible for your Fury pilots, and they can take out that Fury's fighter wing, and these guys can do their jobs and try to run interference. Like, they don't necessarily need to land their torpedoes and their missiles onto the Idris. It's more just an interference thing so that this guy can do its job. But that's going to be all for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this video, comment down below. I would love to hear from you, and see you guys in the next video. Peace.